Good morning, everybody. I'm going to lead the session on the Neuroscience Consortium. Thank you all for coming. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Steven Zorn. I'm a Ryan Research Professor at the George and Ann Ryan Institute for Neuroscience Research. I'm also President and CEO of Mind Immune Therapeutics, that little company that Stefan Pryor alluded to before. There's never been a better time to be thinking about studying and doing research in neuroscience. The innovation that's going on in brain research right now is at a fever pitch, and the medical need in brain diseases dwarfs all other therapeutic areas in terms of pain and suffering. And there's a tremendous opportunity here to build something that has been struggling across the industry for a long time. So Rhode Island has taken a step, and that is in December of 2015, 5 institutions, as Stefan mentioned, signed an MOU. These institutions are all involved in neuroscience in some way or another, and also related healthcare fields, all from Rhode Island, have joined forces in an unprecedented move to create a collaboration to support and coordinate neuroscience research across the state as a new ecosystem. The participant institutions within this consortium are the University of Rhode Island and the Ryan Institute, Brown University and the Brown Institute for Brain Studies, Lifespan, which is the owner of the Rhode Island Hospital, which houses the Norman Prince Neuroscience Institute, and the Providence VA Medical Center and the VA Center of Excellence for Neurorestoration and Technology, Neurotechnology, and Care New England, which is the owner of Butler Hospital. The goals of this collaboration are bold, but they include bringing significant advances in the understanding and treatment of brain disorders, sharing information on research projects, forming interinstitutional partnerships that capitalize on each of the individual partners' strengths, developing training opportunities for scientists, physicians, biologists, engineers, mathematicians. As somebody said earlier, it takes a community to do this kind of research, and all others involved in bringing forward advances in the neurosciences. To engage in collective planning, and also to work together to promote neuroscience research in Rhode Island through providing research symposia and workshops. Now, I believe that true breakthroughs in the diagnosis and treatment in this area is only going to occur when there's a collaboration among and between disciplines and institutions of like minds and disparate scientific effort to foster creative thinking, innovation, and progress. And this consortium presents just an opportunity for that to occur. Each of today's speakers will highlight the cutting-edge research ongoing in their respective organizations and discuss the consortium efforts to join forces in this unprecedented way in making tomorrow a better place for those caring for and suffering from brain disorders. So what I'd like to do is I'll start by talking a little bit about the George and Ann Ryan Institute for Neuroscience Research and Mind Immune, and then I'll introduce the other members of the panel. So the George and Ann Ryan Institute for Neuroscience is a recently established research and discovery-based organization at the University of Rhode Island in Kingston, and it has partners with other universities in the state, clinical centers, community organizations, and companies across the state. We are dedicated to finding treatment and cures for neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and the like. Our vision is to be a local and national center of excellence dedicated to the eradication of neurodegenerative diseases. Our research is focused in some non-traditional areas with respect to these diseases and trying to understand what triggers the atrophy and the death of the major component cells, the neural cells within brain tissue that are responsible for all things Alzheimer's, all things human, that lead to these types of diseases, including Parkinson's, ALS, and others. Our core faculty include neuroscience researchers in several departments at the University of Rhode Island in Kingston, and a faculty network including all members of the consortium and a variety of companies and other collaborators beyond. We hope to improve lives, which is why we're also active in clinical, caregiver, and support communities. And we offer a unique scope and breadth, integrating discovery science, translational medicine, education, and community engagement, all to identify and deliver tomorrow's treatments today. Dr. Paula Gramis recently became the head of the Institute and is bringing a world-class expertise in focusing on new ways to understand the causes of Alzheimer's disease. One way is by thinking about developing strong evidence that an inflammatory reaction in blood vessels of the brain may trigger or accelerate the degeneration of these neural cells I mentioned earlier to cause death of these cells and lead to Alzheimer's disease. In addition to vascular factors, the Ryan Institute is also focused on epigenetics, neuroimmunology, drug repurposing, protein regulation, natural product science, and I can talk more about that later during the discussion, or you can see Tristan Davies in the booth outside later who's got a handout on that. Another key feature of the Ryan Institute and another key goal of the center is to create public-private partnerships. And last year, the Institute formalized its first public-private partnership with MindImmune Therapeutics, Inc., the company that I head up, which is a pharma startup company exploring potential brain disease therapies, including those for Alzheimer's and Huntington's disease, by targeting a unique area called neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation is becoming acutely recognized as a key factor underlying the etiology of many, if not most, brain disorders, and has been under-recognized and underappreciated in pharmaceutical drug discovery for a long, long time. We recognize that neuroinflammation may in fact be causative as an underlying factor of these diseases, and the MindImmune scientists are at the forefront in recognizing that there's a therapeutic opportunity in targeting this missing link, these neuroinflammatory type target systems, but as a way of approaching new ways to think about these types of diseases. We built the first, some of the members of MindImmune Therapeutics built the first neuroinflammation unit at a drug company, and before we left that company and came to Rhode Island, we built that into a very vibrant unit, and we've continued on that theme in building MindImmune Therapeutics in our collaboration with the Ryan Institute. The MindImmune company was founded by myself, Frank Minetti, who's in the audience, Brian Campbell, and Bob Nelson, who I'm not sure if he's in the audience, all ex-Pfizer or ex-Lundbeck or ex-mid-size or small-size pharma, and expert scientists and researchers in the fields. Together, we're developing first-in-class treatments that use this as an underpinning by focusing on neuroinflammation to go after these types of diseases by taking a creative approach to drug discovery. We are grateful for another aspect of the ecosystem that Stefan mentioned, and that is the support provided through the Slater Technology Fund, a state-sponsored venture development fund which provided inception stage capital for the launch of MindImmune Therapeutics. When MindImmune was looking for a home, we searched for cutting-edge places up and down the East Coast from New York to Boston. And we weren't concerned by what Stefan said, that everything comes out of Boston. We were looking for a very good place that had good facilities and that had a good ecosystem that could support the kind of innovative research we were looking for. But we also wanted to build some type of a public-private partnership that has eluded much in the industry before. The University of Rhode Island's George and Ann Ryan Institute for Neuroscience became our home. That's headed up by, as mentioned, Paula Gramis, and ended up being the ideal location for us to work and to pursue our goals. This new partnership allows MindImmune to leverage the rapidly expanding Rhode Island ecosystem of academic and clinical neuroscience resources to advance our drug discovery programs. It also allows us to share are considerable, over 100 years combined, pharmaceutical research, development, full pharmaceutical value chain experience with our academic colleagues and vice versa to create a very powerful platform in which to do drug discovery and a very, very good place to do it. We're now physically located in the College of Pharmacy, where we have a lab, office, and we share facilities. And in partnership together, we did execute a mutually beneficial innovation agreement that is in regard to IP, intellectual property. This innovation agreement regarding intellectual property, we believe, could set a new standard for the conduct of public-private interactions for future startup, company, university interactions across the country. So that's a little bit about how the Ryan and MindImmune are working together and within the state consortium. Let me introduce to you our next speaker, Steve Rasmussen, who is the chairman and Mary Zucker Professor, Department of Psychiatry, Human Behavior at the Alpert Medical School at Brown University, to talk about some additional aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano. So, I'm a psychiatrist, and as you can imagine, there's probably a pretty good-sized market for psychiatry in Rhode Island. But I'm going to focus today a little bit on some of the exciting innovations that are happening in the field of psychiatry and its relationship to engineering and computational neuroscience that are happening at Brown. And I want to talk about that because we're not very good at translating discovery into actual companies at Brown. We need you and everyone in this audience to help us take our ideas and turn them into actual products and devices. But I am going to tell you a little bit about some of the excitement that I think that is present in the investigators doing this work, and talk a little bit about how big the space is at this point. So people are probably aware that I was involved in drug development for a variety of different anxiety and mood disorders in the 1990s with a number of different pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies have moved away from CNS development over the course of the last decade because of a lack of what they think are clear targets and clear hypotheses for new drug discovery, with the exception to that probably being Alzheimer's disease, which Stefan's already mentioned. And instead, they've turned their attention to what the president of Glaxo has called electroceuticals, or new devices or circuit therapies that target particular circuits in the brain that are thought to cause different types of neuropsychiatric symptoms. And of course, the markets for these are big. Depression, anxiety disorders affecting somewhere in about 20% of the population. So there is interest in the development of these circuit therapeutics that take advantage of some of the new devices that have been developed over the course of the last 15 years. One of these devices was initially developed for Parkinson's disease. It's called deep brain stimulation. Essentially, it's passing a very thin wire into a nucleus that's deep in the brain called the subthalamic nucleus, and delivering electric pulses to it that affect the major symptoms of Parkinson's, such as tremor or difficulty in gait. There are now about 85,000 people in the US who have been implanted with this device, which is owned by Medtronic. And people may not be aware, and one of the things in psychiatry we have been very interested in is moving the innovations that have been developed in the motor system into the frontal part of the brain, where we think most of the neuropsychiatric disorders, such as depression or obsessive compulsive disorder, lie. People may not be aware that the first worldwide implant for deep brain stimulation was done right here in Rhode Island Hospital with Medtronic, and that the first US implant for OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, was done here in Rhode Island, and that led to the first FDA indication for a neuropsychiatric disorder for DBS. And that also we've been instrumental in developing other types of non-invasive stimulation treatments, such as transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation here in Rhode Island that have, at least in the TMS field, led to an FDA indication. So Rhode Island is in a strong position, I think, to develop the next generation of devices for neuropsychiatric conditions. We have tremendous neuroengineers. We have computational neuroscientists. We have cognitive neuroscientists who understand the frontal lobe. And we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 110 full-time faculty spread across 5 different institutions in psychiatry. So it's a space that I think is waiting, sitting out there to be developed. And it's not the only one. There's also applications of technology for real-time assessment of psychiatric disorders. So where you can set up a network and be able to monitor people who, let's say, are suicidal, and be able to have contact with those people in a real-time way. Another whole area that's out there now in optogenetics, which is a way to be able to turn on and off these circuits with the use of light, which allows us to be able to take advantage of some of the molecular genetic advances that have been occurring, to be able to target specific neuronal populations that I think are involved in these neuropsychiatric conditions. So, very large space, very exciting time for us. We are interested in being able to interact with MedMates and to develop relationships with companies in Rhode Island, as well as the larger device companies that we already have very close working relationships with. The Nelson Center for Innovation that has been developed at Brown is a vehicle, an additional vehicle that we will be looking forward to working closely with. I just would echo what Stefan said, that it's a very exciting time for those of us working in this field right now. And we hope that some of the excitement that we're experiencing in the discovery area can turn into innovative new devices that can help people. So with that, I'll close. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to invite Carl Saab, who is Associate Professor of Neuroscience at Brown University and Rhode Island Hospital, Departments of Neurosurgery and Neuroscience.
I'd like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation, especially MedMates, and extend a special thank you to Barbara Rosengren, if she's here. She's done an impeccable job in coordinating all of our panelists here and the logistics of it. Thank you, Barbara. I guess this event is the ultimate showcase of successful partnerships between academia, the clinics, and the biotech sectors. So my goal here is to give you a brief overview of this partnership and to share with you my personal experience being part of this ecosystem, all from an academic vantage point. So I'm a researcher within an academic/clinical setting at Brown University and Rhode Island Hospital. My dual affiliation allows me to dive deep into the basic science while keeping an eye on potential translational opportunities. So this kind of arrangement is ideal for transforming scientific discoveries in the lab into the clinical realities that could potentially have a significant societal impact. However, as we all know, as Steve mentioned, this kind of transition from the bench side to the market is not always straightforward. It is challenging, and it's rather a tortuous path that a researcher like myself has to navigate with no one guidebook. Luckily though, both Brown and Rhode Island Hospital, as well as an extended community of entrepreneurs, financial advisors, as well as government programs in the state have put in place wonderful support mechanisms to fill in this gap, making sure that every ambitious researcher and aspiring entrepreneur gets a fair shot at a venture creation. So in the remaining few minutes, I'd like to share with you a real-life story, an example from my experience, to further illustrate how a discovery we made in our lab is being translated into a business model. So my lab studies the neuroscience of chronic pain. That means our goal is to better understand the mechanisms of pain in the brain, which will ultimately lead to better treatment options for the millions of patients. In fact, pain affects more than 64 million people, an equivalent of about a fifth of the entire population. And most of us are painfully aware of the opioid epidemic ravaging this country. When controlled substances that are extremely addictive and life-threatening are being distributed as lollipops, finding better cures for pain becomes an urgent necessity rather than a research luxury. So last I checked, I think the rate of overdose fatality in the state is about 1 tragic death per day. So a strategy in the lab is guided by the premise that pain is a subjective experience. Therefore, that means that pain has to be in some way correlated with a particular brain activity pattern. And so if we're able to identify and image such brain activity patterns, that means we're able to quantify pain, give it a number, and ultimately diagnose it using objective tools and measurements. So a pain quantification system would also allow drug companies and device companies to optimize their therapies, to make them more effective, and to develop newer therapies with less side effects, as an alternative to opioids, for example. So with this in mind, we set out to translate our scientific discovery into a business model, a venture, in other words, that would allow us to pursue our goal of bringing novel medical technology and devices outside of an academic setting and into the marketplace. So we first applied for a seed grant, which was jointly funded by the Brown Institute for Brain Science, also known as BIBS, and the Norman Prince Neuroscience Institute at Lifespan. So that strategic alliance between BIBS and NPNI is something I want to emphasize, and it's a perfect example of how shared resources in a small state like Rhode Island can have a tremendous impact and a multiplier effect on research. We then follow through the classic path of collecting preliminary data and publishing in high-impact scientific journals, but obviously for something as complicated as engineering and creating a completely new device to diagnose pain, you need to involve a multidisciplinary team. You need to involve engineers, clinicians, neuroscientists, and computational neuroscientists, as Steve has mentioned again. And there's another advantage of our ecosystem where you can find unique talents and skills in your own backyard. This is a true spirit of collaboration. This is not just lip service that we put in grants. So what followed was a less than conventional path from the researcher's perspective again, working with our wonderful tech transfer office at Brown, filing a suite of patents, and consulting with local stakeholders on campus like the PRIME program at Brown, which helped introduce our venture to a group of talented students who carried out bottom-up market research. So Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce then pitched in with funds for 2 student interns who are working in the company, and we were fortunate enough to be selected winners in the Rhode Island Business Plan competition. So all this helped provide much needed cash influx, again small amounts but with multiplier effects, in addition to in-kind legal and financial services. So in the end, all of these support mechanisms made it possible for us to secure several research grants that we brought into the state, into our institutions, and contractual agreements with multinational firms and Fortune 50 companies. So building a startup is never easy or straightforward. Again, I'm stating the obvious. But I'm proud to say that we made it thus far without having to leave the state. So not that we don't want to leave the state, it's just that we don't feel like we have to leave the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Now I'm going to invite John Simmerl. Dr. Simmerl is a research biomedical engineer with Providence VA Medical Center and the VA Center for Neurorestoration and Neurotechnology, where he leads a focus on restoring communication and mobility. He's also an assistant professor of engineering research at Brown University.
Thank you. So I'd like to take a few minutes this morning to talk a little bit about the project that I'm involved in, and then just a couple of minutes at the end to say maybe how that relates to the conversation we're having here today. So I'm here representing a research group, a mostly academic research group that is a consortium of a number of institutions, both academic, healthcare related, government, and industry that are focused on our research project called BrainGate, which is a neuroengineering technology being developed to offer the possibility of promoting independence for people with severe paralysis, or for people whose paralysis extends to even the inability to speak, to restore a degree of communication. These conditions arise from a number of different circumstances that you may be familiar with. For example, a high cervical C4 spinal cord injury, Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS, which is a progressive disease that slowly eliminates the ability to make willful motor movements, or stroke. In particular, for us, brainstem stroke can cause these symptoms, locked-in syndrome, for example. In all of these cases, it turns out that the cognition and the ability to imagine making motor movements is intact, but it's simply the case that those motor commands can't get down through the spinal cord and descend to their muscle targets. So in these cases, the BrainGate system works by placing a small microelectrode array sensor down on the surface of the brain. So open the skull, it goes right down on the part of the brain where those motor commands go out, in our case, to the arm and hand. So these are the high fidelity, dexterous commands that would, if possible, control a person's individual arm and hand movements. But since those commands can't get through the normal pathway, the sensor sends those signals out to our rack of equipment where the computers execute algorithms that are being developed by the mathematicians and the computer scientists at Brown to infer the motor intentions of that person. And what this does is allow somebody imagine making a hand or finger movement, moving a mouse, using their index finger to imagine a click, to actually send those commands out to a computer through our system to imagine making those movements and actually perform point-and-click movements on the computer. So as you can imagine, for somebody that is severely paralyzed tetraplegic, the ability to have that sort of digital access can be highly enabling. For somebody that's unable to speak, they can use a virtual keyboard, again, by pointing and clicking to select letters or to perform Google Chat, what have you, using that point and click just like you and I would. In other modalities, somebody with paralysis could control an assistive arm if they imagine making 3D movements. An assistive arm may be a prosthetic arm, like the advanced DECA arm that's being run through clinical trials at the Department of Veterans Affairs Hospital here under Linda Resnick. Or even control their own muscles. So somebody with paralysis can have stimulating electrodes placed in their arm, and as they imagine making those 3D movements or a grasp, we can generate pattern stimulation to the muscles so that they can actually move their own arm, grab a cup, and bring it up to their lips. And in fact, that was demonstrated with our colleagues at Case Western and published just last month. So at this point, I need to say that's all just an investigational device for investigational use only. 13 people have been enrolled in the trial over the last 10 years and have had this array implant and worked with us, and they sign up for about a year each to stay with us. Most of them choose to stay longer. So with that in mind, let me just say why I think we're relevant here. As with all of your work and the work that's been described earlier, this isn't possible without highly multidisciplinary, multi-institutional collaborations Clearly, the folks at Brown are the engineers, the neuroscientists, the neurologists, the neurosurgeons, the computer scientists, the whole realm of machine learning, all come together in that environment, and that's great. But to turn that into something more than just a research project, we need our collaborations with Rhode Island Hospital, with Mass General, who's leading the clinical trial in this case, but also with the industry partners. In fact, I was just very excited that while I was sitting here, I got a text from one of the engineers that said one of the pieces of equipment that we've developed with Bay Computer Associates here in Rhode Island and VR Industries here in Rhode Island just started working, and that's a wireless microwave receiver that's basically streaming internet off the head wirelessly so that we can get those signals out safely. Other partners include Certec and Mojo Tech, who's a software firm right here in Providence, has helped us do some discovery. So these sorts of collaborations are so fruitful here in this town and in this state. I feel like we can really get the attention of our vendors so that they almost become partners with us because of the size of the state and the interest in what we're doing. So it's really been a fantastic place for us to be working. So I guess I'll leave it at that now. We see a future for this device which goes beyond this narrow realm that I just described. This is really a platform technology. We have funding from the BRAIN Initiative that was instigated under President Obama. Because really what we have is a platform technology that allows us to stream huge volumes of data from a person, from a behaving person in their home, and all the potential information that provides for clinical purposes beyond what I've just described. So, thank you.
Thank you. There'll be an opportunity, if anybody has questions from the audience, to come up to the microphone in the front and bring your questions forward while we're still up here. How much time do we have left, given 5 minutes? Okay. So I think what we heard is that, if you're going to think about neuroscience research, it takes a community. When I used to work for Big Pharma, I think it's fair to say that the way Big Pharma thought was that in order to do drug discovery research, we needed to own it all and do it all in the same building or within the same company. I think the damage that does in terms of thinking about something as complicated as the brain is that it's not possible to do everything yourself. It's not possible to have one set of scientists trying to think through all the innovations. And I think that you got some examples today of how complicated this area is. So just in the last speaker mentioned that we're talking about huge volumes of data that come from a single individual, and how does that data get integrated? We also heard about this interplay between academic research and clinical research. And how do you take these basic science ideas, I think Carl was talking about this from his work and his colleagues at Brown, how do you translate that into something that you can measure in a human being objectively, that you can get a readout from, take it back to the laboratory, iterate it several times, and come up with something that could be a treatment, and then translate that into a medicine? That takes a community to do that. Steve was talking about the tremendous opportunity in psychiatric research these days, depression, OCD, anxiety, to name a few. Yet the industry, Big Pharma, has retreated from psychiatry research over the last several years, leaving us in a crisis of where will these medicines come from in the future if the drug companies are actually leaving that space. I think that what's exciting here is that they may be gone or retreating now, but with the kind of work that's going on that Steve described, and the innovation that's going on in Rhode Island and other places within these types of consortia, we're starting to see that all these different likes of scientists and expertise are starting to come together that will then create the seed corn for new investigative work, for new pharmaceutical discovery to help translate everything that I just said into some type of a medicine. In the time that each of you had, and I know it was very brief, was there anything that you really would like to add to this, to talk about the importance of why working together in a consortium makes it a better model for us to be able to innovate and go forward?
I guess I would just add one thing, which is for attracting talent to the team, we have a lot of competition, obviously, from other places that have hubs of innovation. One of the things that really I think is a powerful draw is this collaboration that we can clearly define and describe between the clinical side, the research side, the industry that we have here. And it's really getting at least countrywide recognition and a lot of times worldwide recognition such that we can draw people from all over the world to be members of the team that we have. Of course, the challenge is having an environment that keeps them here.
Yeah, and I think that Rhode Island may be a small place, but Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, psychiatric disease are not diseases that are unique to Rhode Island. These are diseases that affect all of us all over the world. And as a consortium of researchers and institutions that are focused on bringing all of us together, I think that Rhode Island, as a small place, can have significant contributions to the world by being able to make progress in this sector. I think the enthusiasm that Steve shared in the psychiatric area, I don't know if you want to say some more about that, Steve, but it really worried me a few years ago, this retreat of the industry. But what gives you confidence now, Steve, that the work that you and others are doing will bring them back into the fray?
Well, I think that the prevalence of these disorders and the suffering associated with them means that they're not going to be ignored going forward. And I think it is a temporary lapse in the bigger companies' interest in terms of trying to get into that market, and some of the innovations that you were talking about earlier in the neuroinflammation area. Some of the innovations that I talked about in the device area are likely, I think, to spawn renewed interest. Just to echo a little bit what John said, I think that when we recruit people here, we are competing against the Stanfords and the Harvards of the world. And I think one of our neurosurgery recruits said it best, which is, who came from MGH, and said that while he was there, the number of collaborative interactions he had developed, because it's so siloed in some ways there, it's so big, was actually less than he had developed in the first year while he was here. So one of the advantages we do have as a small state is the potential to be able to wrap your arms around what is happening here. And it's a very collaborative place. I think we really have some tremendous opportunities to foster that collaboration with this type of organization. So.
Yes, go ahead, Carl.
I just wanted to add a quick comment that for the biotech sector, I think they're starting to view neuroscience as a new oncology. And it's just starting to happen, and they're starting to come back. Of course, the big guys have to come in first, and then the herd will follow. But unlike oncology, actually, neuroscience, when you view neuroscience diseases in terms of circuitry and circuit therapeutics, you open it up to engineering and computational, all kinds of people to play around in this field, not just the cellular and molecular parts of it. That's why I'm excited personally. There's a device component, there's a molecular neuroinflammatory component. Obviously, I'm biased, I'm a neuroscientist, but the biotech is realizing that neuroscience is a new oncology.
I completely agree with that, and I think that, again, from my big pharma experience and now working in a biotech, taking something incredibly complicated as drug discovery and bringing it down to something simple where there's not 120,000 people trying to figure out how to do something, but 4 or 5 working in a consortium like this to try to bring our problems together with everybody else and to solve them together takes a community. And I think that's what Rhode Island is doing and has done with that MOU, which is unique in our state and will be an example for others to follow. Any additional comments from the panel? Any questions from the audience? One question?